Masechet Yevamot Daf Sadi Dalid. Their opening Mishnah of this Perek, and the Gemara's discussion confirmed that one witness is believed to say that a woman's husband has died, and therefore she is allowed to get remarried. The question that we've been dealing with immediately above is, what about in the case of Yibum? Is one witness believed to say that your Yavam died, and therefore you are allowed to go and marry someone else? So that's the question that we are going to address right now, and bring two proofs in addition to the previous discussion. And we learn from a Mishnah later in the Perek that says, a woman herself, a wife herself, or Shomeret Yavam, is not believed to say, oh, listen, my Yavam died, I'm going, she'enaseh, so that I can go marry another man from the shuk. She's not believed. And another case, so the first one is more directly our case that we're asking about. But another case there is that the woman says, my sister died. My sister was married to some guy, and therefore, by testifying that her sister died, she can go and take her place and marry her husband, her previous brother-in-law. Shekanes lebeta. Now, if the sister did in fact die, that would be permitted. The man is not allowed to be married to two sisters while they're alive, but if one died, then he can take his wife's sister. In these two cases, they are not believed. That's the end of the Mishnah, the first part of the Mishnah. Now we analyze. Hi nihi de la mehemna ha'aydehad meheman. Oh, so we see that she herself is not believed because she has ulterior motives. Perhaps she wants to, perhaps she's lying. Because she wants to marry outside, or she wants to marry this brother-in-law. So she's not believed, but that means that one witness is believed, because if one witness was not believed, you wouldn't have to say that she is not believed, you say one witness is not believed, and this wife herself, she is also one witness. So you can make a more expansive law. Therefore, we can derive from here that one witness is in fact believed to say, oh, the Yavam of this person died, and therefore she can go free and marry someone else. All right, that's the proof, but then we reject it. Vili ta'amich, in that logic, emasefa, look at the continuation of that very Mishnah. En ha'ish ne'eman lomar met achi, sheyabem et ishto. A man is not believed to say, my brother died, and he died without children, and therefore I'm going to go do yibum with his wife. No, you cannot do that. Velo meta ishti she'esa et achota. It is also not believed to say, my wife died, so that he can go and marry his wife's sister. So that's the parallel. Now, end of Mishnah, we'll analyze and say, Hu nihu de lo meheman ha'aydechad meheman. He himself is not believed, but according to this, we could infer that one witness would be believed in these cases. Now, but the problem is that this is not true. One witness is not believed to allow a man to remarry in any of these cases. The reason is because, as we saw way in the beginning of the Perek, we believe one witness only because we want to prevent an aguna, right? If the husband is away and we don't know where he is, then we don't want her to not be able to be married, to be chained to a possibly deceased husband, a missing husband for her whole life, and therefore we rely on one witness to say he's dead. So this is a special dispensation for a woman in cases where she will not be able to remarry. It would not apply to a man. It also would not apply, incidentally, to the woman who says, my sister died and I want to marry the husband of my sister, because she doesn't have to marry him. She is permitted to marry anybody. Okay, so that's why he is not believed. Now, bishlama gabe isha mishum iguna akilu barabanan. So regarding the wife, in the case of here, met Yevami, so because if the Yavam is alive and we don't know where he is, she will not be able to marry anybody else until we establish that. Or if she was married and the husband is missing. So in those cases, yes, we believe one witness. But regarding a man, there's no way we would believe one witness to permit a man to marry. And therefore, since this logical derivation in the sefa of the Mishnah does not lead to a correct conclusion. Therefore, the same logical derivation in the Resha must be rejected, and therefore we do not have a proof from here that one witness is permitted. So if that's all true, then what is this whole Mishnah needed for if it's not teaching us anything particularly new? אלא כי הסתריך לרבי עקיבא הסתריך סלקא דתך מן הואיל ורמר רבי עקיבא יש ממזר מחייבי לוין המה חיישה הקלקולה דזרעה ודייקה. We need this to teach a chidush that even this is true, that this law is true even according to Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Akiva is the one that says that if someone violates an isur lav, it results in a mamzer. So you might have thought, according to Rabbi Akiva, maybe we should believe this woman to say my yavam died, then I'll go marry. And if she does marry, that's only in isur lav. But for Rabbi Akiva, an isur lav can create a mamzer, and so we might think that she will worry about ruining her children who will be mamzerim if the Yavam is still alive. And therefore, she will make sure she's not going to lie. She's going to go and investigate. She's not going to say that without 100% proof, because she's the one that's going to bear the brunt of the punishment of the consequences with her children, and therefore maybe she would be believed. So kamash malan, that's why the Mishnah comes to tell us that that she's just worried about herself, and because she likes this guy and she doesn't want to marry the Yavam and she wants to marry someone else, and she's just thinking about that, and she's not really thinking right now about the future possibilities of a mamzerim children, and therefore we do not believe her, because we cannot assume that she's taking into account the far-reaching consequences to the next generation. All right, so now we come to the next possible proof that one witness would be believed for a shomeret yavam to marry outside. Rava Amar Had Eman Bivama Mikal Vachomer. I can learn it from a Kal Vachomer that one witness is believed regarding a Yevamah that she says my Yavam died and I can marry elsewhere. Leisur Kareti Tarta Leisur Lav Lo Kol Sheken. Since we believe one witness for an Isur Karet, that's in the case where a woman is married, the first Mishnah, and the husband goes overseas and one witness comes and says he's dead. We believed one witness, and that if he's still alive, that would be, and she goes and is with someone else, that would be an isur karet, that's adultery. So if we believe one witness in the case of a serious case of isur karet, all the more so isur lav. If the yavam is still alive, in fact, and she goes and marries somebody else, it's only in isur lav, so all the more so we should believe one witness. That's Rava's proof. All right, sounds like a good proof, but his colleagues rejected. Amar le'ahu merabanan le'Rava. A certain one of the sages said back to him, "Hi atzma tochiach de lisur karet hitarta, lisur lav lo hitarta." I can learn from she herself. When she testifies about herself, we say that when regarding isur karet, we do believe her. If she testifies, my husband is dead, if a woman testifies that her own husband is dead, she can marry another man. We do believe her. We want to say for her from Aguna. And yet, if she says, my Yavam is dead, we just saw the Mishnah, we do not permit her. Now, why don't you make a Kavachomer? We see that those Mishnayot do not make a Kavachomer, and therefore, this logic is not true. So that rejects the Kavachomer. Okay. And what is, in fact, the reason why she is not believed regarding we said to say Yavam, my Yavam is dead? Because sometimes she hates him and she doesn't want to be involved and have to do. I mean, she can ask for chalitza, but it's a whole to do. Maybe he doesn't going to refuse the chalitza. She's going to be stuck, have a hard time because she hates him. She will not check it further, and she'll say, "Oh, look, one witness, anything." She'll follow anything to say that he is dead. So if that logic is true and she herself is the witness, then it also applies the same thing when one witness comes, not her, someone else comes and says your husband is dead. She's going to say, oh great, I hated that guy anyway, I will believe you. and therefore she's not going to hire her own private investigator to make sure that in fact the husband is dead, and therefore we cannot believe one witness in this case, and that's the reason why the Kal Vachomer doesn't work. Whereas in the case where the husband has gone missing, she says, not the Yavam is dead, but rather my husband is dead. In that case, there's no reason to assume that she hated her husband. I mean, she was married to him, and therefore we would believe one witness, and she herself would be believed, because in that case, we assume she would investigate, and she would not she would not say that he was dead if in fact he was alive, without full investigation. All right, so that's the two explanations. And then the last part of our Mishnah said, Ze midrash darash Rabbi Elazar ben Matya. This is a case where a woman went and she did kiddushin with another man after she heard she got testimony that her husband is dead, but it turned out to be wrong. But only did kiddushin. So in that case, she's allowed to go back to her first husband, and even if the second husband gives her a get, which is actually not necessary because the kiddushin is not valid since the first husband was alive the whole time. But even if he does end up giving a get, she can go back and marry a kohen. She's not pasul l'keuna because that get was completely unnecessary. So that was the law. And we learned it from the pasuk, Visha gerusha me'isha. A kohen is not allowed to marry a divorcee only if she was, in fact, a divorcee from marriage and required a get. But if she was never married, not even kiddushin, to that guy, and so he just gave her a get for fun, or wrongly in thinking that it was necessary when it was absolutely not necessary, then a kohen can still marry her. That's what we derived. That's the midrash that they derived. Okay. So commenting on this, Rav said Rabbi Elazar, he derived it from that pasuk, but he could have learned a pearl from it, and all he got from it was an earthenware shard. In other words, he learned a simple law from it, one that was pretty obvious anyway, right? What are you learning? That someone who doesn't require a get, so is not considered a divorcee. It's pretty obvious, and you missed an opportunity to learn something that is a bigger chidush from this pasuk. So what is it? My marganita ve'tanya v'isha gerusha me'isha afilu lo nitkarsha ela me'isha pesula dechuna v'hainu reach haget posel bekehuna. You could have learned the following case: if someone divorced only from his wife, in other words, he gives her a divorce and says in the get, right? Behold, you are divorced, but you cannot marry any other man, right? So you're divorced only from me, but you are not together with anyone else. Now that divorce is invalid. The whole point of divorce is to completely separate the husband and wife and permit her to go ahead and marry others. I mean, you can put some conditions in it, but the conditions have to have certain time limits, so that at some point she will be totally free. And here she is not free to marry, so it's not a valid divorce. Nevertheless, if a man gives his wife a divorce a get that says this, even though it's invalid, she cannot marry a kohen, because this comes to include even an isha who's divorced, a woman who's divorced only from her husband, but not yet fully divorced and not allowed to marry anybody else. That person also, a kohen cannot marry. Now, even though this get is invalid, this is called reach haget. It has the trace, the smell of a get. It's kind of like a get, and that is sufficient that it creates this prohibition. Not a doraita prohibition, even though actually we're learning it from pasuk here, but it's similar to a valid get, and therefore that's the pearl. You could have learned this big chidush here. Instead, you learned something that was already obvious. All right, and now the next Mishnah. Now we're going to turn the tables around, and in this case, it's the wife who went on the trip, and we don't know what happened to her. So we say, Mi shehalcha ishto lemedidat hayam ba'u va'amru lo meta ishtecha v'nasa et achota v'achar kach ba'a ishto muteret lachzor lo u'mutar bikrovot sheniya u'shniya muteret bikrovotav ve'imeta rishona mutar ba'sheniya. If a woman goes away to a foreign land, and then some testimony comes back and said, oh, I'm sorry to tell you, your wife has died. So now he says, well, you know what? I will marry my wife's sister, which is permitted if in fact the wife died. But then the wife shows up and says, hey, honey, I'm home, and then finds that it's her sister is with her previous husband. So the husband has to leave the second wife, the sister, because that was not permitted. In fact, the wife was alive the whole time, so they were married, so it was always prohibited to her. So he violated, maybe unwittingly, but now he cannot remain with her, and he is allowed to go back and stay with his original wife, because for a man that the laws of adultery do not apply to him. He lived in sin, but not a sin of two sisters, not a sin of adultery. I mean, theoretically, if it was someone else, he is allowed to marry two wives. So he can go back and live with her, and he is allowed to marry the relatives of the second wife. For example, if that second wife, the sister of his current wife, of his first wife, had a daughter from a previous marriage, from another marriage, he would be permitted to her. And also that second wife is permitted to his male relatives. In other words, even though they were in a prohibited relationship for a while, that does not prohibit their relatives as if they were married, because they were never married. And if eventually the first wife dies, then he can go and marry the second wife. And just because in the past they had a prohibited relationship unwittingly, nevertheless, now that the first wife has died, he can marry the second sister. אמרו לו מתה אשתו ונשא את אחותה ואחר כך אמרו לו קיימת הייתה ומתה. So if a more complicated case or similar to the one before, she goes away and witnesses say, your wife has died. And he goes and marries a sister. But then they say, oh, sorry, that was wrong information. Actually, she was alive, but now she's dead. So that must be weird emotionally to find out that she actually was alive, but anyway, she's dead now. Well, the point is, Habalad Rishon Mamzer v'Acharon En Mamzer. Children from before the first wife died are mamzerim, because at that point he had a child with his wife's sister. That's erva. But any children he had after his wife actually died, they are not mamzerim, because at that point he is allowed to be married to his wife's former wife's sister. Okay, that's all good. Now, Rabbi Yosef says a little bit of a complex case. Rabbi Yosef Omer, Kol sheposel al yedei acherim, posel al yedei atzmo, v'chol she'en posel al yedei acherim, en posel al yedei atzmo. He has what you can call a reciprocal rule. If you have a case where someone else will be disqualified, then he also is disqualified. Where if no one else will be disqualified, he also is not disqualified. So the cases above were where one is not disqualified. Where would someone else be disqualified and that cause a reciprocal reaction? That would be case as follows. Let's say you have couple A and couple B. In couple A, the wife goes away, and in couple B, the husband goes away. Maybe they go away, maybe they're together at a conference or something. And the witnesses come and say they both died. And now the husband in couple A marries the wife in couple B. And they are sisters. Okay. So regarding the first, man A, so it's the same as what we said before. But now it turns out that they're alive and they come back. Now look at it from the perspective of man of couple B. From his perspective, his wife went and had an affair with this guy, and it doesn't matter if it's unwitting, because she thought that her husband was dead. This is the first Mishnah of our Perek. There we apply all of the disqualifications, and so she has to leave both husbands, and so on and so forth, and therefore she is disqualified. That husband B is disqualified from being with his wife again. So the Yosef says reciprocal rule. If in any case one side of it is going to become, in this case, one sister is going to be pasul, so too the other one also will be, and therefore, husband A would not be allowed in such a case to be back together with his wife. Okay, interesting rule that the Gemara is immediately going to discuss and say the opposite, right? Here the Gemara is going to say, well, the opinion of Tanakama. who will say to the further extent of leniency. Even if his wife and his brother-in-law, meaning husband from couple B, go away. And because he, the husband that stays, marries the sister that stays, that nisuim will be effective to the extent that it will prohibit his couple B to ever be back together. Nevertheless, even though his sister-in-law is prohibited, his original wife, his first wife of couple A, is permitted, and couple A can get back together. And we do not say, since the sister-in-law, brother-in-law, couple B are prohibited to each other, therefore his wife, the first one of couple A, also is prohibited. No, we do not say that. All right, so that's interesting, and exploring the extent of the leniency of Tanakama. The Gemara next is going to make an observation. It seems that our Mishnah must not be the opinion of Rabbi Akiba. And now it's very possible it's not, but we'd rather that the Mishnah be unanimous if we could. So this is somewhat of a question. Because according to Rabbi Akiba, one would need a get in this case. Why? We're about to show the source. According to Rabbi Akiba, if someone marries, is married, and then he goes and does a kiddushin nisuin ceremony with his wife's sister, then he is required to give her a get. Even though there's no the kiddush. Usually, if someone does kiddushin to someone he is prohibited to, any of the adayot, the kiddushin is not valid, and therefore no get is required. Rabbi Akiva says in this case a get is required, and therefore in our case of our Mishnah, where the wife goes away and he hears that she's dead, and she goes ahead and marries the sister. So then when the wife comes back, he will be required to give a get to the second wife, the second sister. And once he does that, then his original wife is the sister of his divorcee. And the sister of a divorcee is prohibited. When they are, right, sister of a divorcee is also prohibited, because until one dies, he cannot marry the other, and therefore he would not be able to remain with his first wife. So you see, Rabbi Akiva cannot be the author of our Mishnah. Now let's see the source of Rabbi Akiva's law here. According to Tanakama, anytime someone tries to do a kiddushin ceremony with any of the forbidden relations in the Torah, the kiddushin is not valid, and therefore, while it's a prohibition, they are not married, and therefore do not require a get, except for one case where eshet ish, adultery, where someone remarried mistakenly based on the consultation of the court. The court ruled, like in our first Mishnah, where the court ruled, it says, okay, we declare your husband is dead, you can remarry, and she does so, and the husband comes back. So because she got permission of the court, therefore that gave a stamp of authority on that second marriage and gives it some validity, and therefore she is married to the second one and has to receive a get. That's anyway the peshat of this baraita. The Gemara Bavli interpreted as one witness, and therefore still needs to get midrabanan. Okay, that's Tanakama only in that one case. Rabbi Akiva, however, interestingly, adds two more cases. Eshet ach, if a man tries to do kiddushin with his brother's wife, then he has to give a get to her. The reason is because potentially, eventually, he might be able to marry that very brother's wife if his brother should die without children and she becomes a Yevamot. Since there is such a possibility of them being married, so therefore, even though right now the brother is alive and he's permitted to her. Nevertheless, the Rabbi Akiva says there's some possible validity, so you have to give a get. And also Achot Isha, his wife's sister. Although right now they are prohibited, they are prohibited to each other. But potentially, if the current wife would die, he would be permitted to her sister, and therefore potentially they could be married in some scenario, and therefore they do require a get. Now, וכיוון דאמר רבי עקיבא באי הגט ממילא התאסרה עליה והביאה לה אחות גירושתו. And once you require a get, then the first sister who is currently married to becomes the wife of his divorcee and will be prohibited. And yet our Mishnah said that in this case, when the wife goes away, he marries the sister, the wife comes back, he can remain with the first wife. Wait, but according to Rabbi Akiva, he would have to give the second one a get, and then would be prohibited to the first. So Rabbi Akiva cannot be the author of our Mishnah. But then we say, no, not necessarily. V'lav itamad Allah, amar Rav Gidel, amar Rav Chiya bar Yosef, amar Rav, hay eshet achechida, mekigon shekidesh achiv et ha'isha, והלך למדינת הים, ושמע שמת אחיו ועמד ונשא את אשתו. Rav says, when did Rabbi Akiva say this? Only when there was kiddushin only. When the first, the case of Eshet Ach, we're going to start with. For example, a man did kiddushin with his brother. A man's brother did kiddushin, only kiddushin with a woman, and he went away. And they heard that he died. So now they only had kiddushin so far. And now the brother and comes and he does kiddushin and nisuin with her. Now people looking, damre inashehach kama tena'aha ve'le b'kiddushin v'hai shapir nasiv. People will say, "Oh, I get. How was he allowed to marry this one? Must be that the first one, the husband who went away, when he did kiddushin, he must have done it on condition, some condition, and the condition that was not fulfilled, and so therefore there was no kiddushin. And the second one is in fact fully married. Therefore, in that case, should the original husband come back, the one who was away." Then he had the valid first kiddushin. The second marriage ceremony was not valid, but you will require a divorce because the people looking on will assume that the first kiddushin was not valid, the second one was valid, so you need a divorce because of the optics in this case. And similarly in the second case, achot isha nameh. For example, someone did kiddushin only with one sister, and she went and to a foreign place, and they heard that she died. Amad v'nasat achota, and then he married the sister. So people will say, what happened to the first wife, the one who went away? Must be that they only did kiddushin. There must have been a conditional kiddushin, and the kiddushin never was fulfilled. And therefore, the second one is a full marriage. That's what it looks like. Right, and therefore, when the wife actually comes back, he has to give a get to the one that he married second, because it does seem like the first one is only in condition, the second one is valid, even though that's all not true. The first one was a valid kiddushin, and the second one is no good. Nevertheless, you require a get. Okay, all that is only in cases where with the first people was only done kiddushin. But all this opinion of Rabbi Akiva would not apply for nisuin, because people don't generally make a condition in a nisuin. It doesn't work as well. It's not generally done, and so no one's going to assume if they did full nisuin with the first time around with the original wife, and then she goes away, and then he's with the second one. No one's going to assume, oh, I guess it was a nisuin al tanai, and really the second one is good. Everybody will understand that she's still married to the first, and the second one does not need a get. Even Rabbi Akiva would not require a get in nisuin, so therefore Rabbi Akiva could, in fact, be the author of our Mishnah. Very good. Okay, and now one last point. Amar le Rav Asher le Rav Kahana. Rabbi Akiva litne name hamoto. Hold on. I have another reason to say that our Mishnah is not Rabbi Akiva, because that our Mishnah only mentions a case of sisters, but it doesn't. But if it was Rabbi Akiva, then we should mention also a case of a mother-in-law. For example, a wife goes away, and then they hear he's dead, she's dead, and then he goes and marries his wife's former ex-wife, because she's dead now, her mother, his former mother-in-law, because according to the Rabbi Akiva, right now we're assuming that is permitted. Rabbi Akiva said that one's mother-in-law, after the death of his wife, if he is with her, there is no punishment of burning. Generally, the punishment for being with one's mother-in-law is burning. And he says, no, that does not apply. It only applies when the wife is alive, but not after she died. So this could be another case that would be a good example in our Mishnah. In fact, the Mishnah does not say it. Must be that it's not, the Mishnah is not by Rabbi Akiva. Okay, now let's see the source, the Tanya. Be'esh yisrefu oto ve'ethen. In the case of someone who takes a woman and her daughter, it says they shall both be burnt. Let's look at the pasuk inside. It's a bit difficult. It says V'ish asher yikach isha ve'et ima. If someone takes a woman and her mother, that would be his mother-in-law, is considered zima, and in fire yisrifu, they shall burn oto, him, so he gets burned, so because he violated, and also ve'eten, and them sounds like the wife and the mother, but this is hard to understand. He sinned with the mother-in-law. Why should the wife be burned? What does the eten mean here? So that is subject to machloket. Oto ve'et achat mehen Rabbi Ishmael means one of them, whoever he sinned with. So only one of them, not both. Fine, that's Rabbi Ishmael, who generally is more a regular literal reading. Rabbi Akiva Omer oto ve'et shetehen. He says yes, him and both of them. Now, what does it mean, both of them? There's two opinions within Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Ishmael savar hada ketiv, Rabbi Akiva savar tarte ketiv shapir. So according to Abaye, there's difference of interpretation of the meaning of the pasuk between them, and Abaye could explain all of this just fine, because according to him it simply means as follows. According to Bishmael, he says it means one of them. Eten means one of them, of whoever he sinned with. And Rabbi Akiva says two. It says two, and it's referring to two people. Who is it referring to? His mother-in-law and his mother-in-law's mother, his grandmother, is his wife's grandmother. Both of them are prohibited to him, and both of them require burning. And so according to that, this would be a prohibition that would apply forever, even after the wife died. And so this would not be includable in the Mishnah. So then there's no question according to that. But the question is according to Rava, Rava says the difference between Rabbi Ishmael and Rabbi Akiva is that Rabbi Ishmael says the mother-in-law is prohibited forever, even after the wife dies, whereas Rabbi Akiva says that the mother-in-law is permitted after his wife dies. In this interpretation, the reason why he says eten, both of them, is to say that when they are both alive, both his wife and the mother-in-law, then the mother-in-law is liable to burning, but not if the wife is dead and only one is alive. So according to that, since this is an equivalent case to two sisters, where also if one dies, you can marry the other. And here, if the wife dies, he can marry them, he can be with the mother-in-law. Why not include this as a similar case to the law in the case in the Mishnah? And if it doesn't, must be this is our Mishnah is not Rabbi Akiva. Well, we have an answer. It's true. According to Rabbi Akiva, is within the interpretation of Rava, it's true that the pasuk says that she will not get burnt in such a case. If a wife is dead, then and the man is with his mother-in-law, then there's no punishment of burning. But does it take away the prohibition? No. The pasuk is not saying it's permitted; it's still prohibited, and so therefore this would not fit into the Mishnah and is not equivalent to the case of two sisters, where in fact if one sister dies, it's completely permitted to take the other. Baruch Adonai Le'olam, Amen ve'Amen.